Welcome to the Midnight Chill, a short passage of classic mystery and horror to accompany you as you drift towards sleep. Tonight's reading is from Dracula by Bram Stoker. I struck a match and by its flame looked at my watch. It was in a few minutes of midnight, and I waited with a sick feeling of suspense. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road. A long, agonised wailing, as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another, and another, till, borne on the wind, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of the night. At the first howl, the horses began to shiver and sweat, as though from sudden fright, and then, far off in the distance, from the mountains on each side of us, began a louder and a sharper howling, that of wolves, which affected both the horses and myself. They reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all his strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my ears became accustomed to the sound, and the horses became quiet, so the driver was able to descend and pet and soothe them and whisper something in their ears. And under his caresses they became manageable again, though they still trembled. The driver took his seat and, shaking his reins, started off at a great pace, suddenly turning down a narrow roadway which ran sharply to the right. Soon we were hemmed in with trees, which in places arched right over the roadway till we passed as through a tunnel. And again great frowning rocks guarded us on either side. Though we were in shelter, we could hear the rising wind, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks, and the branches of the trees crashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still, and fine powdery snow began to fall, so that soon we and all around us were covered with a white blanket. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though they were closing round on us from every side. I grew dreadfully afraid, and the horses shared my fear. The driver, however, was not in the least disturbed. He kept turning his head to left and right, but I could see nothing through the darkness. Suddenly, away on our left, I saw a faint flickering blue flame. The driver at once checked the horses, and jumping to the ground, disappeared into the darkness. I did not know what to do as the howling of the wolves grew closer. But while I wondered, the driver suddenly appeared again, and without a word took his seat, and we resumed our journey. I think I must have fallen asleep and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeated endlessly, a sort of awful nightmare. Then, for a time, there were no more blue flames, and we sped onwards through the gloom, with the howling of the wolves around us, as though they were following in a moving circle. At last came a time when the driver went further afield than he had yet gone, and during his absence The horses began to tremble and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause for it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether. Just then the moon, sailing through black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of a beetling pine-clad rock, and by its light I saw around us a ring of wolves, with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. They were 100 times more terrible in that grim silence which held them than even when they howled. I felt a sort of paralysis of fear. All at once the wolves began to howl, as though the moonlight had had some peculiar effect upon them. The horses jumped and reared with eyes that rolled, but the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had to remain within it. I called to the coachman to come, for it seemed to me that our only chance was to try to break out through the ring. And to aid his approach, I shouted and beat the side of the carriage, hoping by the noise to scare the wolves from that side, so as to give him a chance of reaching the trap. I heard his voice raised in imperious command, and saw him stand in the roadway. As he swept his long arms, the wolves fell back, and back further still. Just then, a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, so we were again in darkness. When I could see again, the driver was climbing into the carriage, and the wolves disappeared. This was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or even move. The time seemed interminable as we swept on our way, now in almost complete darkness, for the rolling clouds obscured the moon. We kept on ascending, with occasional periods of quick descent, but in the main, always ascending. Suddenly, the driver was pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast, ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came not a single ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the sky. This has been the Midnight Chill, a quiet echo from an older world. Sleep well, and good night.